up on my family's farm in the remote hills of Puerto Rico. Life was simple but hard. We relied on our livestock for our livelihood, and every animal was precious. My parents had gone to town to buy supplies, leaving me in charge of the farm for the first time. I was nervous but determined to prove myself. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I finished my chores and settled in for a quiet night. Little did I know, something sinister was lurking in the shadows. The night was unusually quiet, with only the occasional chirp of a cricket breaking the silence. I sat by the window, reading a book, when I heard it, a low, guttural growl. My heart skipped a beat. I grabbed the flashlight and headed towards the barn, where the sound seemed to be coming from. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer, just more growling and the unsettling sound of something moving inside. As I approached the barn, the growls grew louder. I pushed the door open slowly, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. There, hunched over one of our goats, was a creature unlike anything I had ever seen. Its eyes glowed red in the light, and its skin was leathery and covered in patches of dark fur. Spikes ran down its back, and its mouth was stained with blood. I gasped and stumbled back, my flashlight shaking. The creature looked up, locking its crimson eyes with mine. For a moment, we stared at each other, frozen. Then, with a snarl, it lunged at me. I barely managed to slam the door shut and run back to the house. Inside, I locked all the doors and windows, my heart racing. The growling continued outside for what felt like hours before everything went silent. I stayed awake until dawn, too terrified to sleep. The next day, I found the barn in disarray and several goats dead, their bodies drained of blood. My parents returned that afternoon. "Maria, what happened here?" my father asked, surveying the damage. "It was the Chupacabra," I said, my voice shaking. "I saw it last night. It killed our goats." My mother looked at me with concern. "Are you sure? Maybe it was just a wild animal." "No, Mama. I know what I saw. It wasn't like any animal I've ever seen." Word of the attack spread through our small community. Some believed me, while others were skeptical. But I know the truth. The Chupacabra is real, and it's out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. It was the height of summer in Mexico, and the days were long and hot. My son, Miguel, had gone missing earlier that day, and as night fell, my hope of finding him dwindled. I searched everywhere, asking neighbors and friends, but no one had seen him. Someone suggested I check near the river, where children often went to cool off. The air was thick with humidity as I approached the riverbank. The moonlight cast an eerie glow over the water, making it shimmer like liquid silver. I called out his name, my voice echoing in the stillness.
Miguel.
"Where are you?" Suddenly, I heard a sound that sent chills down my spine. A woman crying. It was a mournful, heart-wrenching wail that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I followed the sound, hoping it might be someone who had seen my boy. As I drew closer to the water, I saw her. A woman in a white dress, her long black hair flowing down her back. She was standing at the edge of the river, her face hidden by her hair. "Excuse me," I called out. "Have you seen a little boy around here?" She slowly turned to face me, and I felt a wave of cold fear wash over me. Her eyes were hollow, and her face was twisted in sorrow and rage. She reached out a bony hand towards me, and I stumbled back in terror. "Ms. Eros," she whispered, her voice like the rustling of dead leaves. "Where are my children?" Realizing who she was, I turned and ran, her cries echoing behind me. I didn't stop until I reached home, my body shaking with fear. The next morning, I told my wife, Rosa, about the encounter. "Carlos, you must have been seeing things. It was dark, and you were worried about Miguel," she said, trying to comfort me.
No, Rosa.
It was her.
La Llorona.
She was looking for her children, and I think she wanted to take Miguel. Just then, our neighbor, Elena, arrived with Miguel. "I found him playing by the old ruins," she said, smiling. "He's safe." Relief washed over me, but I couldn't shake the memory of La Llorona's haunting cries. Even now, I avoid the river at night, and whenever I hear the wind rustling through the trees, I remember her mournful wails. La Llorona is out there, and if you hear her crying, you better run. I was traveling through the Venezuelan countryside, heading home after visiting family. The sun had set, and the darkness seemed to swallow the road ahead. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves. As I walked, I heard a faint whistling sound. It was eerie, like a slow, mournful tune. I stopped, straining to hear more clearly. The whistle seemed to be getting closer, then farther away, in a maddeningly unpredictable pattern. I remembered the stories my grandmother used to tell me about El Silbón, the whistler. He was the ghost of a young man who had murdered his father and was cursed to roam the earth, carrying a sack of bones and whistling his mournful tune. If you heard the whistle close by, he was far away, but if it sounded distant, he was near. My heart raced as the whistle grew louder. I quickened my pace, hoping to leave the sound behind, but it seemed to follow me. Panic set in, and I began to run, the whistle growing ever closer. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I turned, and there he was, El Silbón. His face was gaunt, his eyes empty sockets. He carried a sack over his shoulder, and I could hear the bones rattling inside. "Do you know what I've done?" he whispered, his breath cold on my skin. I screamed and broke free, running as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I reached the lights of a nearby town, collapsing in exhaustion. The whistling had stopped, but I knew I would never forget that sound or the horror of his touch. Back in town, I told my friend, Mateo, about the encounter. "Juan, are you sure? It could have been a trick of the mind," he said, trying to calm me.
No, Mateo.
It was him.
El Silbón.
I could hear the bones in his sack. I replied, my voice shaking. Mateo sighed. "These legends, they have a way of becoming real when you least expect it. Be careful out there." I nodded, knowing he was right. El Silbón is real, and if you ever hear his whistle, pray that it sounds close by. Ever since I was a child, I was fascinated by the stories of La Luz Mala, the evil light. My grandparents used to warn me about the mysterious lights that appeared in the Argentinian plains, leading travelers astray and sometimes to their doom. As an adult, my curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate these lights for myself. Armed with a flashlight and a notebook, I set out one evening, determined to find the truth. The night was clear, the stars twinkling above as I wandered the plains. I had been walking for an hour when I saw it, a faint, bluish light hovering in the distance. My heart raced with excitement and a touch of fear as I approached. The light danced and flickered, leading me further into the plains. I followed, mesmerized, until I was far from the path. Suddenly, the light vanished, plunging me into darkness. Panic set in as I realized I was lost. I turned to head back, but another light appeared, closer this time. It was beautiful, almost hypnotic. I felt a strange compulsion to follow it, and as I did, I heard whispers, like voices carried on the wind. "Sophia," they called, "come closer." I snapped out of my trance and realized the danger. La Luz Mala was trying to lead me astray. I turned and ran, the lights chasing me, flickering in and out of existence. I stumbled and fell, my flashlight flickering out. The lights closed in, and I felt a cold, malevolent presence surrounding me. With a final burst of energy, I got up and ran until I saw the lights of a nearby farm. I collapsed at the doorstep, breathless and terrified. The farmer, Don Roberto, took me in and gave me a cup of hot tea. "You're lucky to be alive," he said, shaking his head. "La Luz Mala has claimed many lives." "I thought it was just a story," I admitted, my hands trembling. "Stories often have roots in truth," Don Roberto replied. "You were wise to run. Many do not get that chance." I spent the night at the farm, and the next morning, I returned home, vowing never to venture into the plains at night again. La Luz Mala is real, and its beauty is a deadly trap for the unwary. As a traveling salesman, I often found myself in remote parts of Peru, selling goods to isolated communities. One such trip took me deep into the Andes, to a village that seemed frozen in time. The air was thin, and the cold bit at my skin, but the people were kind and welcoming, offering me a place to stay for the night. That evening, after a modest meal, I sat with the villagers around a fire, listening to their stories. They spoke in hushed tones about the Pishtaco, a mythical creature that preyed on unsuspecting travelers, draining their fat for dark purposes. I dismissed it as mere superstition, but their fearful expressions told a different story. Later that night, unable to sleep, I decided to take a walk. The moon was bright, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain. As I wandered, I noticed a figure in the distance, pale and motionless. Curious and a bit uneasy, I approached. "Buenas noches," I called out, but the figure remained still. As I drew closer, I saw that it was a man, his skin unnaturally pale, almost glowing in the moonlight. He turned to face me, and a chill ran down my spine. His eyes were cold and calculating, and a sinister smile played on his lips. "Are you lost?" he asked, his voice smooth and eerie. "I was just taking a walk," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Be careful out here," he said, stepping closer. "There are dangers you wouldn't believe." I nodded and quickly turned to leave, but I could feel his gaze burning into my back. As I hurried back to the village, I heard footsteps behind me, quick and silent. Panic set in, and I broke into a run, not stopping until I was back at the safety of the fire. The next morning, I told the villagers about the encounter. Their faces grew pale, and they exchanged worried glances. "That was a Pishtaco," one of the elders said. "You're lucky to be alive. They lure travelers away and drain them of their fat." I shuddered at the thought. What can we do to protect ourselves? "Stay together and don't wander off at night," another villager advised. "And if you must travel, carry a charm for protection." The villagers gave me a small amulet, which I gratefully accepted. As I prepared to leave, they urged me to warn others about the Pishtaco. I left the village with a new sense of caution, always keeping the amulet close. The Pishtaco is not just a story, it's a warning. To all travelers in the Andes, be vigilant and never let your guard down. The shadows hold more than just darkness. They hide ancient evils waiting to strike. Life in our small town in Guatemala was peaceful and predictable. I lived with my family in a modest house, and we were known for our beautiful, well-kept garden. One summer evening, after a long day of tending to the flowers, I sat by the window, braiding my long, dark hair. That night, I had a strange dream. A tall man wearing a wide-brimmed hat and dressed in black appeared at my window. His eyes were hidden under the brim of his hat, but I could feel his gaze on me. He smiled, revealing sharp, white teeth, and began to sing a haunting melody. When I woke up, my hair was intricately braided, even though I had left it loose before falling asleep. I dismissed the dream at first, but over the next few nights, it happened again. Each time, the man got closer, and the braids became more elaborate. I confided in my best friend, Anna, who looked at me with wide eyes. "Isabella, that sounds like El Sambaran," she whispered. "He's a spirit that braids women's hair and haunts their dreams. You must be careful." Despite her warning, I wasn't sure what to do. That evening, I stayed up late, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious figure. Around midnight, the temperature dropped, and the air grew thick with an unsettling stillness. I heard the faint sound of singing, the same haunting melody from my dreams. Gathering my courage, I peeked out the window. There he was, El Sambaran, standing in the garden, his eyes glowing beneath the brim of his hat. He looked up and locked eyes with me, and I felt a cold dread wash over me. I slammed the window shut and ran to my parents' room, waking them up with my frantic knocking.
"Papa, Mama."
"There's a man in the garden. It's El Sambaran," I cried. My father grabbed a lantern and a machete, and we went outside together. The garden was empty, but the scent of roses lingered in the air, stronger than ever before. "We need to see the priest," my mother said, her voice trembling. The next morning, we visited Father Manuel, who listened to my story with a grave expression. El Sambarin is a powerful spirit, he said. We must protect your home and your hair. You must braid your hair tightly and pray every night. I will bless your house. That night, I followed Father Manuel's instructions, braiding my hair tightly and saying a prayer before bed. I placed a crucifix under my pillow and hoped for the best. The dreams stopped, and El Sambarin no longer visited our garden. But I never forgot his haunting song or the fear he instilled in me. To this day, I braid my hair tightly every night and keep a crucifix close by. In our small town, the legend of El Sambarin is more than just a story. It's a reminder of the dangers that lurk in the shadows, waiting to prey on the unsuspecting. As a farmer in the Paraguayan countryside, I was accustomed to the rhythms of nature and the hard work that came with tending the land. Our farm was nestled near a dense forest, which provided us with wood and a sense of mystery. My wife, Rosa, and I had always respected the forest, knowing it held secrets and spirits. One particularly dry season, strange things began to happen. Our chickens went missing, our crops were trampled, and we heard unsettling noises at night. My wife suggested it might be El Pombero, a mischievous forest spirit known to cause trouble when displeased. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, I decided to stay up and keep watch. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and earth, and an eerie silence settled over the farm. Around midnight, I heard soft, whispering voices and the rustle of leaves. I grabbed my lantern and machete, venturing towards the edge of the forest. There, among the shadows, I saw a small, hunched figure with long, wiry hair and piercing eyes. It was El Pombero. Who goes there? I called out, trying to sound brave. The figure chuckled, a low, raspy sound that sent chills down my spine. I am El Pombero, he said, his voice like the rustling of dead leaves. Why have you disturbed my forest? We mean no harm, I replied, my hands shaking. We only wish to live in peace. El Pombero stepped closer, his eyes gleaming in the lantern light. You have forgotten the old ways, he said. You must appease me, or your troubles will continue. Desperate to save our farm, I pleaded with El Pombero to tell us what we needed to do to appease him. You must offer a sacrifice, he said, his voice echoing through the trees. My heart sank at the thought. Sacrifice? What could we possibly sacrifice that would satisfy a forest spirit? But then, an idea sparked in my mind. What if we offer you something of great value to us? I asked. El Pombero cocked his head, intrigued. What do you propose? I hesitated for a moment before speaking. We will give you the most precious thing we possess, our firstborn child. Rosa gasped beside me, but I held her hand tightly, knowing that this might be our only chance to save our farm. El Pombero considered my offer for what felt like an eternity before finally nodding in agreement. Very well, he said. Bring me your firstborn child on the night of the next full moon, and your troubles will be no more. Relief flooded through me as El Pombero disappeared into the depths of the forest. I knew the sacrifice was drastic, but I was willing to do anything to protect our livelihood. Months passed, and our farm flourished once again. But as the full moon approached, Rosa and I couldn't shake the heavy weight of our decision. On the night of the full moon, we ventured into the forest, our hearts heavy with sorrow. But as we reached the clearing where we had encountered El Pombero, we were met not with a fearsome spirit, but with a beautiful sight. There, surrounded by a soft, golden glow, stood El Pombero, cradling a newborn baby in his arms. I have come to collect what is mine, he said, his voice gentle. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I realized what had happened. El Pombero had accepted our sacrifice, not to harm our child, but to bless us with a new addition to our family. With a grateful heart, I thanked El Pombero, knowing that he would always watch over us and our farm. And from that day on, we lived in harmony with the forest, never forgetting the debt we owed to the mysterious spirit known as El Pombero.